The nurse smiled at me as she injected the needle, but her hands were cold, and her eyes, they were empty, like she wasn't human anymore. That's when I knew I wasn't going to leave that hospital alive. My cousin, Bola, wasn't just family, he was my closest friend. We grew up in the same small village, running barefoot on hot sand, building slingshots from tree branches, and daring each other to climb the tallest trees. So, when I heard he was sick, I dropped everything to see him. At first, it seemed like nothing too serious, a fever that wouldn't go away, some chills, and fatigue. My aunt, Bola's mom, took him to the hospital, hoping it was just malaria. But after 2 days, he wasn't getting better. When I stopped by the house to check on him, I was told he was still at the hospital. That's when I decided to visit. The hospital in our town was a grim place. It sat at the edge of the main road, surrounded by weeds that had grown tall and wild. The building looked like it hadn't been painted in decades, with cracks running down the walls. The air smelled of disinfectant, damp walls, and something sour I couldn't identify. When I stepped inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The waiting area was almost empty except for a few tired faces. No one made eye contact. Even the nurses moved quietly, their shoes barely making a sound on the tiled floor. I went to the front desk, where a nurse sat flipping through a thick file. She was tall and thin, with sharp cheekbones and deep-set eyes. Her uniform was spotless, but her face looked like it hadn't smiled in years. "I'm here to see Bola," I said. She didn't answer at first. She looked up slowly, her dark eyes locking onto mine. A chill ran down my spine. Finally, she pointed down a dimly lit hallway. "Room 7, she said, her voice soft but flat. When I walked into Bola's room, I almost didn't recognize him. His once vibrant face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his lips dry and cracked. He looked at me, relief washing over his face, but it quickly faded into something else, fear. "Kelechi," he whispered, his voice weak. "Bola, what's happening? Why are you still here? Are they not treating you?" I asked, sitting by his bedside. "They are, but," he glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "She's going to kill me." "Who?" "The nurse. Nurse Ifewa." I frowned. "Don't say that. She's just here to help you." He shook his head violently, coughing from the effort. "No, Kelechi. She's not normal. People die here. People who shouldn't." I tried to calm him down, but his fear was infectious. His hands trembled as he held mine. Before I could say anything more, the door creaked open. Nurse Ifewa walked in, carrying a tray with a syringe and some small vials. Her smile was wider now, too wide, and her eyes didn't seem to blink. "It's time for your injection," she said cheerfully. "No." Bola whimpered, trying to push himself back on the bed. I stood up. "Wait, what's this for?" "He's scared." She turned her smile to me. "It's to help him feel better. Don't worry." Her voice was calm, but there was something off about it, like she wasn't really trying to convince me. Before I could stop her, she had already swabbed Bola's arm and plunged the needle in. He winced but didn't fight anymore. As the liquid disappeared into his vein, his body relaxed, but his breathing sounded heavier. "Visiting hours are almost over," Nurse Ifewa said, looking at me. "You should go now." I wanted to argue, but something about her gaze made me freeze. It was like staring into a dark well, deep, endless, and cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. Bola's words kept replaying in my head, "She's going to kill me." The next morning, we got the call. Bola was dead. I couldn't believe it. He was sick, yes, but he wasn't that sick. My aunt was inconsolable. She kept saying the same thing over and over. I knew it. I knew something was wrong. We went to the hospital to collect his things. The staff seemed cold, almost indifferent, as if this kind of thing happened all the time. While my aunt argued with a receptionist over some paperwork, I wandered back toward Bola's room. I don't know why, I just felt like I had to. The hallway was quieter than I remembered, and colder too. As I passed one of the rooms, a hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I nearly screamed but stopped when I saw it was an old man. "Leave this place," he whispered urgently. "That nurse, she's not human." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. "She takes them," he said. "The weak ones. The ones no one will question. She takes them for her rituals." Before I could ask more, Nurse Efua appeared behind me. I hadn't heard her footsteps, and the old man instantly shrank back into his bed. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and hard now. I nodded and hurried back to the front. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what the old man had said. What did he mean by rituals? And why did Nurse Efua seem to appear out of nowhere? I decided to ask around. Over the next few days, I spoke to people in the village, those who had been to the hospital, those who had lost loved ones there. The stories were chilling. One woman said her brother had gone in for a simple operation and died mysteriously. Another man claimed his father had been improving before Nurse Efua started treating him, only to pass away suddenly. There was even a rumor that she worked nights alone, preparing bodies for burial in ways no one understood. The more I heard, the more terrified I became. But I couldn't let it go. Bola deserved justice. One evening, I decided to go back to the hospital. I didn't tell anyone. I just wanted answers. The hospital was eerily quiet when I arrived. Most of the lights were off, and the air felt heavier than before. I crept down the hallway, staying close to the walls. When I reached Nurse Efua's office, I pressed my ear to the door. Inside, I heard faint chanting. My heart raced as I pushed the door open slightly. What I saw made my blood run cold. Nurse Efua stood in the center of the room, surrounded by candles and strange symbols drawn on the floor. In her hands was a small vial of blood. She was muttering something in a language I didn't recognize. I stepped back, but the door creaked. Her head snapped up, and her eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, her voice low and menacing. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the hospital and halfway home. I told my family what I saw, but they didn't believe me. "You're grieving," my mom said. "You're imagining things." But I know what I saw. Since that night, I've heard more stories about Nurse Efua. People who question her disappear. Those who survive her care leave the hospital with strange scars and nightmares they can't explain. I don't go near that hospital anymore. And when I hear someone mention Nurse Efua, I pray for them. Because if she smiles at you, it might be the last thing you ever see.